So just to recap very quickly. So we were speaking about how the soul has two sides to it, the watery side and the fiery side. The fiery side wants to indulge in spiritual exercises. The watery side wants to indulge more in physical exercises for the soul, wants to be in this world. We also spoke about how the soul has 10 attributes, the 3 intellectual ones, and then the 7 emotional ones. And we started speaking about da'at a little bit, which is the third of the 3 intellectual attributes, which is the ability to feel someone selflessly, completely, where I put myself in someone's shoes without any iota of myself being taken into consideration. I'm fully with the other. If you remember the stories we told about that, the rabbi who was sweating multiple times when he would see people. So that's da'at. Chokhmah and bina, the first 2 intellectual attributes. Chokhmah is that first spark of wisdom, and bina is the development of that spark of wisdom. So they deal with the self. They have to deal with the self. They have to deal with our brains, with our ability to think, with our ability to develop ideas. But then we have to bring the idea that a chokhmah and bina thought of, whether it's a startup of a business, or whether it's a lofty idea, it does not matter. But then we have to be able to then bring down this idea to the world and to others and impact the world with that idea. But the only way to do that is first to allow the other to come into me, and then I can go into the other as we explain. So, bottom of page 115, continuing this idea of da'at. Does anyone want to read? Anyone? Oh?
Okay, got it.
Jordan. Okay.
All right. Dot implies attachment and union, as in the verse, and Adam knew Yada, Eve. Dot is the third of the 3 matrices listed earlier, Chokmah, Bina, and Dot. As we explained, Chokmah is the faculty for apprehending the initial flash of perception, whereas Bina is the faculty for analytic and synthetic thought. Da'at, on the other hand, is not an intellectual faculty, but the capacity to perform connections between the faculties. Dot includes a higher dot and a lower dot. Lower dot, discussed here, is the capacity to build a personal relationship with the subject. It is thus the bridge between the mind and the emotions, relating what has been perceived by Chokmah and understanding by Bina to the 7 midot, where it will stimulate emotional feeling. Higher dot, discussed elsewhere, is what connects Chokmah and Bina.
Just read a little bit more, because I have a feeling we did read that. Yes, go ahead, continue.
In Hebrew, the word dot, commonly translated as knowledge, implies relation and connection, such as between a man and his wife, as in the verse, and Adam, Yada, knew Yada, his wife Eve. In Genesis 18:19, God says of Abraham, "For I know him." Rashi explains that "I know him" is a term of endearment. Also, Boaz, our relative, in Ruth chapter 3, verse 2, meaning someone who is not a stranger, who is related to us. And similarly, quote, "For you have found favor in my eyes, and I shall know you by name," end quote, from Exodus. In each of these cases, dot implies a knowledge that carries a distinct relational emotive element.
Okay, thank you. So the word dot, as Rabbi Stans just explained here, has multiple meanings in Hebrew. One of them is knowledge, but the other one, the deeper one, is belonging, I would say, or the idea that you are fully known. That's why in relationships this word is used, dot, because in relationships people are made known to others. And I would say this relates, I think, to one of the deepest yearnings of the human condition, of human beings, is to a yearning for belonging, a yearning to be known, a yearning to almost come out of our loneliness and connect to someone in the deepest way, so that I know that someone and that someone knows me. It's interesting to note, but when that bridge, when that da'at connection, which is what da'at is, when that connection is made, where I can merge with the other completely, I am known to him and he knows me. Or I loved what Brooke texted me the other day, you know, as a follow-up to the class, but it's true. The word intimacy is almost the same word in English, because intimacy is sometimes can be at least related to it, or being divided into three words: into, me, see, right? Intimacy is that ability to see into someone else and connect to that what you see, and then again become one. That's da'at. But it's interesting to note that that da'at is really the foundation of every good relationship in the Torah. So here we have a few examples. Adam and Eve had da'at. Boaz and Ruth had da'at. And there are many other examples in the Torah, but also when God and the Jewish people are on a good in good terms, or in a relationship that's profound, a relationship of true connection, then the word da'at is often used in the Torah. Now, I will say this: in order for da'at to happen, then it needs to be a two-way relationship, to the point that I not only know the other, but I can also almost be the other. What do I mean by that? It's not enough just to say, oh, I know what you're feeling. But I know it goes further. How so? That I know what you're feeling so much that I'm feeling now the same thing. If you can't sleep, I can't sleep. If you're happy, I'm happy. It's not because I'm experiencing the same pain. No, you're experiencing a pain, but I'm so one with you that that pain is now mine. It's like the famous story about Rabbi Aryeh Levin, who was the rabbi of the prisoners in Israel, who passed away some 30, 40 years ago. He was known for his tremendous humility and righteousness, and he would visit prisons all around Israel and encourage the prisoners there. And one day he came to the doctor with his wife, and he told the doctor, our leg is hurting. And the doctor said, well, whose leg? Yours or your wife's? He says, it's my wife's, but it's ours. Because I'm so one with her that it's our leg is hurting. And he meant it. It's not just that I know the pain that she's going through, but I become that pain. That's da'at. So it's not just the knowledge as that word is usually translated, but it's that one, you know, in honor of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So this coming Tuesday, Monday night, tomorrow night, and Tuesday, as you know, is Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is one of the most happy days in the Jewish calendar, because it celebrates Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the author of the Zohar, the foremost book of Kabbalah. And he's the one who hid in a cave for 13 years. That's when he authored the Zohar due to Roman persecution. And he finally came out and blessed the world with his tremendous light, with the light of his teachings, with the light of his being. He was a man who was seen by his peers. Now, his peers weren't, you know, just the regular Joe and Shmo, but his peers were some of the greatest scholars, Rabbi Akiva, for example, greatest scholars of Jewish history. And he was seen by his peers as a person who was infinitely greater than them. They would call him the embodiment of God himself. He was a miracle worker too. And there are many stories about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but Lag BaOmer is the day of his passing, again, tomorrow night and Tuesday. Now, one of the customs on Lag BaOmer is to light a bonfire. Why? Because to represent such a soul, we can't just light a yahrzeit candle, as we usually do for yahrzeits. He was such a great soul that he was like a bonfire. So we light a bonfire to represent, again, the great light that he was to the world. But there's a lovely story about him that I think maybe illustrates this idea of da'at best. And that is about a couple who could not have children for a very long time, I think for 10 years. And they decided, well, what's more important for us, to stay married or to have children? And they reached the conclusion that it's more important for them to have children. And they said, well, we're going to have to divorce and marry others and then be able to have children. But they weren't sure about their decision, so they went to see Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said to them, you know what? The only way you can do this is that just as you had a big celebration when you got married, you should have a big celebration when you get divorced. The day you get divorced, have a big celebration to say goodbye to each other. So they followed his directions. On the day of the divorce, they had a huge party, and the husband got a little too drunk. And in the middle of his being drunk in that party, he says to his wife, you know what, I'm terribly sorry to divorce you like this, and I love you. Look at my house, I have a lot of valuables. You can take the most valuable thing as a goodbye present to you. She doesn't react immediately. She waits until the husband gets even more drunk. And once he was completely drunk, she ordered her friends, you know what, the most valuable possession that I have in this house that I want to take as a goodbye gift is my husband, is him. So take him home. And they carried him home. He was again unconscious, drunk. In the morning, he wakes up and he says, I'm not supposed to be here. We're supposed to be divorced yesterday. And he calls his wife. He says, well, what happened? And she says, well, you told me to take the most valuable possession. I couldn't think of anything more valuable than you to me. So I took you home. And then they said, well, maybe we shouldn't go along with the divorce. They went back to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, explained to him what happened. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, I was waiting for that to happen. Now that happened, I'm giving you a blessing that you're going to have children. And indeed, the next year they had a child, and then many more children after that. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was known for his blessings too. Now, why am I telling you the story? Because in a way, sometimes we have to reach that level of love, recognize how valuable the person is and how in love I am with that I'm so one with them, I can't say goodbye. And once that connection happens, then it becomes the key to infinity in relationships, the key to infinity in our actualization of our inner potential. It's true in relationships. I think it's true, but also in our relationship with God. It's true in our relationship with ourselves. Sometimes and it happens. That's why, sometimes we don't like ourselves. Sometimes we look at ourselves in the mirror and we say, I don't know this person. And when I don't have da'at towards me, then I can't really unleash my real potential. And it takes a long time to look at ourselves in the mirror and appreciate who we have. It's not for nothing that when God commands us to love our fellow, we read it last week, in last week's portion. It's the most famous commandment in the Torah. You should love your fellow as yourself, right? V'ahavta l'ra'acha kamocha. Why couldn't God just say you should love your fellow? Why as yourself? Because if you don't love yourself, you can't love your fellow. But it goes deeper now with the knowledge of what da'at is. If I don't love myself to the level of da'at, in other words, if I cannot completely feel myself, be myself, then I can't really love the fellow, because I won't be able to also create that real connection with the fellow and then feel his pain, be that person, feel his joy, whatever it may be, but be him. So it's true in relationship with others, but it's also true in relationship with ourselves. If we can apply da'at and really get to know ourselves. Now, what do I mean by that? We have to know who we are. We have to know what our skills are, what our potential is, what our talents are. We have to ask ourselves, are we really almost, to put it in a very general but very, very powerful term, are we living according to the purpose for which we were created? We were created for a unique purpose. God needed us in this world to be us, to be uniquely us. Otherwise, he would have created someone else. But he created you because you have something unique that you can bring to the world. So are you connecting to that uniqueness? Are you knowing, first of all, you applying da'at to that uniqueness? And then are you actualizing it? Are you being you, fully you? So it's true in our relationships with ourselves. And it's true, again, in any type of relationship. That's when da'at needs to apply, to be applied. I will add one thing also, and again, this should be much more of a discussion than just a monologue here. So please feel free to share your comments and disagreements, etc. But it's interesting to note that the word da'at in Hebrew, so it's true in English we have intimacy, but the word da'at in Hebrew has the word ayin in the middle, or the letter ayin in the middle. It's spelled dalet, ayin, taf. Now, if you take the word ein, the letter ein also spells out the word ein, right? Ein in Hebrew means eyes. And in a way, the Kabbalists explain that the way to reach that level of connection where I become one with myself or one with someone else is through the eyes. That's why you have an ein right in the middle. The middle of that, the foundation of that, so to speak, is to use our eyes. Now, how can I use my eyes to reach that level of connection where I become one? Where I am able to almost dig with my eyes into the other. It's not just seeing the other's physicality, it's seeing his spirituality, that looking into the other deeply, profoundly, and seeing what there is there. When I'm able to use my eyes, that's one tool used again, to meditate on the other, to contemplate on the other and on the other's life, then I'm able to reach that level of connection. So it starts with the ein, with the eyes. The eyes then will see something, and then the heart in a way will follow, and then the soul will be triggered to connect fully. The soul to soul connection where I'm one with the other. It starts with the ein. All right, any comments? Anything?
Yeah. So in the story with the couple who were planning their divorce, another thing that happens is when you hit the bottom, the breaking point where they're about to go their own separate ways, that's when we surrender.
Good, that's right. Yeah.
And when we surrender, we let the divine in, and that's when we can break out of our egos and our trips.
Good point. That's right. Yeah, that's right. There's a verse in the book of Psalms, Psalm 90. It's a verse that I think where we got that expression from, rock bottom, right? Where you hit rock bottom, and that's when you're able to open yourself up completely, and maybe then reach that. But it says, Shuva Hashem ad matai, v'inachem al avadecha, where the soul, shouts to God, until when? Like, I've had enough. Now, the Talmud explains that this verse relates to the soul being so crushed that it has nowhere to turn but to God. And then it shouts, ad matai, until when? Ad tichducha shel nefesh, the Talmud says. And in a way, you're right. Sometimes it's that exercise, in order to know the other, you have to peel yourself. You have to peel yourself from your own way of seeing life, from your own terms. And sometimes life peels you so harshly that you're left almost bare and naked, spiritually bare and naked. And then you're open. That's that exercise of that's that idea of hitting rock bottom, that your soul is now left naked. It's so crushed. Then it's completely open, and it's open to then reaching that. That's right. I think that, not to go, we're speaking in high terms and profound Kabbalistic ideas here, but I think it can be applied in our day-to-day lives. I'll tell you this, I'll in education, I think it's true. That the only way we can truly educate our children is if we start seeing life in their terms, not in our terms. I remember how a few months ago, this father came to me and he said, he started complaining, my son won't listen to me at all. And I even tried to sit down and learn Torah with him. And he won't sit down and learn. And we have fixed times in our schedule. Every evening he's supposed to learn. He's not interested whatsoever. I don't know what to do. And I asked him, have you ever played baseball with your son? You say it's his favorite sport. Have you ever played baseball with him? Have you ever connected to him on his level? Have you ever seen the world in his terms? Once you connect, once you create that dot connection, and I use the word dot because, that's that and have understood. But once you connect to him on his level, once you almost rid yourself of your terms, of your way of seeing life, and you go and be with him, then maybe he'll be able to connect to you on your level. He'll be able to come and study. But if we can rid ourselves of our own perspectives, of our own way of doing things, of our own peels, and connect to the other for the other, with the other, then we can't expect the other to connect to us. It's true in education too. I think it's true in every level. And sometimes, like you said, Margot, that's right. Life does that to us. We hit rock bottom, and then we peel ourselves of anything that we ever had, any perspective that we ever had. Then we're able to be much more open to the other. Haida, you wanted to say something?
No, well, I had a question about something, and I had been thinking, oh, I wish that this book had a glossary. And it does. I just found it in the back of the book.
Yeah.
I never looked and took the time to look, and I got my question answered.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good. Excellent. All right. Any other ideas, comments before we move on? Okay. All right. So continuing to speak of that, let's continue here with the line in terms of its place in the structure of the Sefirot. Does anyone want to read? Anyone?
We'll keep going.
Go ahead, Jordan, please.
In terms of its place in the structure of the Sefirot, Da'at is of a lesser stature than Chokmah or Bina. Chokmah and Bina are not only Sefirot attributes, but also Partsufim, faces or configurations, entities with independent and meaningful characteristics. Da'at, on the other hand, is only an auxiliary attribute, so to speak, the force that unites Chokmah and Bina. Yet Da'at plays an extremely important role in the operation of the attributes in the soul. Although it does not build awareness, it determines its actual power and influence. What is perceived by Chokmah and understood by Bina is acquired only by Da'at, whose function is the acquisition of knowledge, its relation to oneself. Hence, the Midrash says, if you have acquired Da'at, what do you lack? If you lack Da'at, what have you acquired?
Right. So Da'at is a combination, that's a profound idea of have something and nothing at the same time. I'll quote the Zohar, again, authored by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, whose yahrzeit is tomorrow night and Tuesday. But he would say also something very enigmatic. He would say, Tachlit hayedi'ah shelo leida. The goal of knowledge is to not know. So what does that mean? That means that you know so much that you know how much you don't know. So it's like a little kid. A little kid thinks he has the power to do everything. I can be Superman. You ask a little child who's 4 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be Superman. Can you be Superman? Then you start learning a little more and filling your mind with a little more knowledge, and you realize, 1 second, there's so much more that I don't know. I thought I knew. But the more I knew, the more I delved into knowledge, the more I realized I don't know. Now, it's true with finite things like being Superman, but it's certainly true with God. God is infinity. So the more I delve into God, the more I realize, gosh, this is infinite. I really don't know. I don't know anything. It's like, I don't know, maybe the sea is an example. You go to the sea and you think you measured it more or less, and then you get closer and closer, and you see it's infinity. The more you realize that the sea is really so much greater, so much more vast than you ever imagined it to be. So same with God. Now, that's what Da'at does. When I have that level of connection, let's say I make a resolution. Today, I want to connect with a person to the level that I'm going to peel myself and my predetermined perceptions completely. I'm going to be, like we explained, be with that person, feel his pain, feel his joy, be with him fully. When I finally make that connection, I realize how much I did not know of this person. I realized really that what I thought I knew, I was completely wrong. I did not know. Then I also realized how infinite this person is, how much more there is to know, how many more layers there are to this person. And that's where, by the way, we realize, God, our preconceptions, our judgment sometimes were so off because we thought we knew, but we really did not know. And that's what the Zohar again says, Tachlit hayediah shelo leida, that the goal of knowledge is to not know. The goal of knowledge, of that type of connection, is to come to the realization that you don't know anything. You know, there's a great Hasidic saying that speaks about judgment. And it says that the only person you could really judge is yourself, right? How dare we judge others? Again, we can't know. If we really put ourselves in their shoes, it's impossible to know them. I'll get back to the Hasidic saying, but it reminds me of the Mishnah in the Ethics of Our Fathers that says that we should that you should not judge a person until you reach his or her place. Now, what does that mean? That you should not judge a person until you reach his or her place. It should have just said, don't judge a person. Well, when you reach his place, then you're allowed to judge. But what the Mishnah is really saying is that you'll never reach his place. You'll never be able to be fully in his shoes. And if you go and you really do reach that place, you'll realize how right he was maybe and how justified he was in his behavior. That's what the Mishnah is really saying. But anyway, the Hasidic saying goes that you can't really judge anyone, you can only judge yourself. But when you judge yourself, then then it's not wisdom that you need, then it's feeling that you need. Something like that. The Hasidic saying says then, I'm trying to translate it from the Hebrew, that when you judge yourself, you can't use your mind, you got to use your heart. That's a better translation. What does that mean? Because using your mind, it's easy. You know, it's like I would say the difference, and I'm sure Jordan here, the doctor, would agree with me, but it's the difference between doctors and professors. Professors can analyze things as much as they want. They exercise wisdom with their minds when it comes to all sorts of illnesses and diseases and whatever else it may be. But there's a different experience being on the ground and practicing medicine in actual reality, using not just your mind, but also your heart to connect to the patient. That's something that labs and professors will never be able to attain. Same thing here. If you are going to judge yourself, then you better exercise that with your heart. You have to be able to be completely sympathetic with yourself. And then you'll be able to judge yourself. But again, what this is saying is that until you reach that level, you'll never know. Until you use your heart, you'll never know. And that's only with yourself. With others, even if you use your heart, you'll never know. That's the level of connection that Da'at provides. Realizing how much you really did not know. So there's something about that. There's that initial connection, but there's also nothing about that, or nothingness about that, where you realize how nothing you were when you were looking at the person from afar. I will say this, it reminds me of a beautiful commentary on one of the most tragic stories in the Torah about Joseph, who was kidnapped by his brothers. Remember the scene where Joseph was approaching his brothers after they had plotted to kidnap him and then kill him and throw him in a pit. And it's interesting to note that the Torah uses the verse or the words, Vayiru oto merachok, they saw him coming from afar. Now, what does it mean from afar? So we could interpret the verse that they saw him coming indeed from physically afar. But the Or HaChaim, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, who was the chief rabbi of Morocco some 400 years ago, he says, no, we shouldn't interpret this verse as them seeing him from afar physically. But they were seeing him from afar emotionally. Rachok mehalev, as he says, afar from the heart. And because they saw him from in such a way that they were distant emotionally, they could think of killing him. If you really are one with the person, then you only have love for the person. You have no feeling of animosity whatsoever. Now, what's interesting is the Or HaChaim continues and says that was the beginning of the exile of the Jewish people, if you think about it, because then Joseph was transferred to Egypt. They became the vice king. And then Jacob, after 21 years, realized that 22 years, he realized that Joseph was living there, so he decided to move his whole family, which was the foundation of the Jewish people, to Egypt, right? Then he finally moved to Egypt, and then we were slaves in Egypt. So that was the beginning of the exile. The beginning of a person's exile, of an exile in any type of relationship, is when I see someone from afar. That creates exile. What was the beginning of the redemption for Joseph? The beginning of the redemption from Joseph was the opposite. When he was in prison, do you remember that biblical episode? And Joseph bumped into two people in prison, and he said to them, "Madua pnechem ra'im hayom? Why are your faces so down today? Why are you looking so terrible today?" Now, it's an interesting question because Joseph was in prison. I don't know if you've ever visited prisons. I have, under the capacity of chaplaincies. And I'll tell you this, one thing is stunning in prisons, and that is that you never see anyone smiling. It's amazing. But there's no joy in prison. And understandably, there's no joy, not because of the conditions, and also not because of the people's state of mind. I mean, they did something wrong, so they have to engage in self-introspection. So what is Joseph doing here? He's saying two people everyone looks sad in prison. So why is he saying that? I mean, they're not eating sushi at a bar mitzvah. They're not home enjoying any slice of freedom. What is he thinking? But Joseph understood that just as his exile began from this emotional distance, his redemption will begin from an emotional closeness. So he turns to people and he says to them, "I love you. I care for you. Why your face is so bad today?" And when he does that, that's when his redemption begins. Eventually, one of these two people remembered Joseph, and he told Pharaoh, "Hey, there's someone who interpreted my dream in prison. Why don't you take this prisoner out and ask him to interpret your dream?" And that was the beginning of Joseph's redemption. So where does it begin again? Because of emotional closeness. So because Joseph exercised da'at in many ways, right? So again, emotional distance. When I don't apply da'at, I create exile. When I apply da'at, I create redemption. That's how far our da'at can go. And in a way, again, this is perhaps the most, we spoke about chokhmah, we spoke about bina, but I would say that this is the most important element in every relationship. Without, again, relationship to ourselves, relationship to others, relationship to God, whatever it may be. But if we can't have da'at, we can have chokhmah. We can try and understand and analyze the other, like we said, like professors do in labs. But if I don't have da'at, if I don't have that emotional closeness, then I really don't have a relationship whatsoever. So it's probably the most important element. Any comments, any ideas?
Yeah. So
Please, yes.
one of the most common things people talk about in therapy about their relationships is he doesn't or she doesn't meet my needs. She doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. He does this. It's whatever. And I look at them and I say, do you know what his or her needs are? It's like, oh.
Right.
But then we have to step outside of our pride and our anger and our disappointment and our whatever. And hey, I've never asked you what your needs are. It's like, it's extraordinary how common it is.
Yeah.
We're like in this defensive.
That's right. That's right. And I think it's important to do therapy like that with ourselves, to ask ourselves what our deepest need is also. Not what my, physical needs are. That's easy. I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need a good massage. But what are my spiritual needs? And that's really much deeper. You're right. It's true. Very, very powerful. Yeah. I think it's no coincidence. I mean, I so agree with what you're saying, because I think you use the word need very correctly. In order to understand a person, we need to understand first and foremost his needs.
It's almost like we have to step into ourselves to step out of ourselves and into the other.
Right. That's right. No, exactly. Yeah. And once we've understood his needs, then we can also understand his emotions. Then we can understand his general vision on life and so on. We have to understand his needs, yeah. You know, it's interesting, but that's the way God deals with the Jewish people, first and foremost. When we came out of Egypt, so God has an interesting conversation with Moses. I mean, everyone's in full ecstasy. We just experienced the splitting of the Red Sea, and we just sang to God. And according to the Midrash, we all became prophets, greater prophets than the ultimate prophet of history, which was, according to the Midrash, Yecheskel, Ezekiel. But then we come down, and then God says, you know what? It was a nice spiritual experience, but they need manna. They need food. So, so I'm going to come out of this spiritual experience, and I'm going to give them food because that's what they need. And it's true. Sometimes, you know, we connect and we love, and love is a spiritual experience, and we bask in some form of spirituality. But at the end of the day, that could also disconnect us from what the person needs. God says, I haven't forgotten that. I remember you need manna. Yes, you're human beings. They need to eat. So I'm going to provide manna. We can continue the spiritual experience if you want, but I'm connected to you, and I therefore understand your needs. And in a way, I think it's true. Love is, in a way, very, very selfish because it's a feel-good thing. And makes me feel good, makes the other feel good, and it's great. But at the end of the day, what makes a relationship is using that, saying, well, what does the other person really need? Not just my love, not just my, I love you and my nice cards and flowers, but what does the person really need? And that's what God does to us in our relationship. So therefore, we should do that to others in our relationship with them too. So I like the word need. Very good. Thank you, Margot. Okay, we're reaching the end of the class, but I do want to conclude again with evoking Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, since it's his yahrzeit tomorrow night and the day after. By the way, this was a day of tremendous celebration throughout history. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, took it to the next level, and many, I know, many. It's also a day that has one prominent blessing available, and that's the blessing for having children. I know someone who's not is not connected, is not a chassid, at least externally, is not like a Hasidic Jew, but he has twins, and him and his wife could not have children for a long time, and he heard that on Lag BaOmer the Lubavitcher Rebbe gives blessings, and it's a day especially for blessings for children, so he decided to go and visit him, and he went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and there was a great commotion, as there usually was. It was during a parade for children that they would have every year. And he asked the Rebbe, can you please give me a blessing to have children? The Rebbe said, Amen. But he didn't hear the Amen of the Rebbe, so he repeated that blessing. Can you please give me a blessing to have children? And the Rebbe said, Amen. And he says, the Rebbe said to him, Amen twice, and therefore he now has twins. A year later, he had twins because of those two Amen. But it's a day of tremendous blessings in general. And we can turn to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and ask him for any blessing we want. So if I may, as we conclude this idea of that, let us turn to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and in addition to all the blessings that we want, and let us ask him today, and especially tomorrow night and on Tuesday, to have the blessing of that, to have the blessing of really being able to connect to others, most importantly, to connect to ourselves. Ask ourselves what our spiritual needs are. Ask ourselves, what is it that we were created for? And then he will give us that blessing, and we'll be able to live a life in a meaningful and a purposeful way.